Hello and welcome to Economy and Markets TV, where we have conversations with a purpose. I'm your host, Dave Okenquist, Senior Research Analyst here at Dent. We're going to take you around the world of economic and financial news, which means I am joined by Senior Editor of Dent Research, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, good morning.
Morning, Dave.
Rodney and I just connected in Baltimore. We were there for some meetings for some holiday cheer and strategizing for 2019 to serve all of you better. So it's always great to meet with everyone face to face, especially we're both remote. So good catching up. Rodney and I, we highlight the most important items of each and every week, usually about 3 or 4, and we try to keep things moving along, which is enforced by this bell, which keeps Rodney in check to about 2 minutes, or unless I decide we're going to go over a little bit. So with that, let's kick off the big item of this week, which is always the first Friday of every month, the jobs report. So U.S. created 155,000 jobs last month. That fell short about 50,000 of expectations. The unemployment remained at about the unemployment rate rather at 3.7%. Something that discouraged workers. Rodney, you didn't mention this in the copy, but so they rose up to 0.2% from 7.4 to 7.6. So that's rising. On the good side, we've had wages rising 3.1% year over year, which is just great. But what are the implications of this job report? I mean, it does feel like a big miss by 50,000.
It is, and in a weird way, this one's positive, right? I mean, we'll talk about the Fed throughout this because we always do, and the Fed is kind of the big news this week when it comes to the stock market. But people are wondering if the Fed is going to keep raising rates in 2019 because a couple of months ago, or rather 6 weeks ago, Fed President or Fed Chair Powell said that we are far from normal in terms of rates, and everybody took that to mean he's going to keep raising. Well, then he recently said, hey, we're just below normal, which everybody took to mean, hey, maybe the one rate hike in December, which we all expect on December 18, 19, will be the last one for a while. And so this number, the employment number coming in lower than expected, gives everybody a little relief to say, hey, wait a second, maybe the Fed will take that as news that the economy's not growing so fast and they won't have to raise rates. It'll give them a reason to stop. And so everybody breathed a sigh of relief when we didn't grow. So a little weird, but people took it in the investment world as a good sign. If I was a worker, maybe I'm not so excited, but investors took that well.
Yeah, that's right. We want the bad news. We're not growing so well, which means we can juice up the market more. Right?
Exactly. A little strange there, but that is exactly what happened.
A couple numbers under the hood that might be of interest to you, Rodney. Manufacturing was up 27,000, transportation up 25,000, wholesale up 10,000. So this feels like some underlying strength in there, right? It also some issues maybe with the weather. The number of people that reported being unable to work was 129,000, which is, I noticed, is the highest in 4 years. Do you get anything out of that? Might have been something weighing on it.
I get out of it the same thing I always do. It's trend rather than number. And so 150,000 in 1 month versus 200,000 is meaningless in a statistic that has a margin of error of roughly 160 to 200,000. And so really it doesn't mean much to me. I understand what the very short-term psychology about it is.
Right.
The real thing here is 3.7% unemployment. Most people are working. And so that's where we are in the United States. Most people have a job.
Perfect. Thank you. You're right on time there. So let's move on to our next oil. We talked about oil last week. We're back on it again. It's been kind of just sitting around the mid to high 50s, low to mid 50s rather. We got some news out of OPEC. They're talking about cutting supply, and there was also a U.S. dip in U.S. inventories. There was a drawdown on there. So that would indicate, and we'll just get right to it. I mean, that seems to indicate we'll see prices rise in at least the short to medium term, right?
Yeah, I love oil. Oil is a great thing. Oil is the lifeblood of industrialization and, of course, economic progress over the last 150 years. Our lives are wildly better because of energy. And so we are, of course, transforming and moving to renewables, but we still use a lot of the hydrocarbons here. And it's all about the U.S. versus the world. And it has been since the 70s with the oil embargo in 73. We've been trying to figure out how to get that power back. And so we finally did. It is about shale. That is this conversation. What's a little lost in the numbers reported this week is that the U.S. became a net exporter for the first time since 1973 of oil plus distillates, which means oil plus distilled gasoline and other things. It won't last. I mean, I expect we'll go back to net import within the next couple of months. But by 2020, we should be net exporters of energy. And that is a change that can't be overstated. It pulls power away from the Middle East, which is a fabulous thing in my world. OPEC and its co-conspirators with Russia and a couple of other producers that are dealing with this, cartel monopoly stuff, they're losing power. And I'm really happy about it. I do expect them to come to an agreement today on the numbers for the supply cuts. I do expect oil to go back up because the producers need it really in the 60 for it to make sense. But still, this is a great development that they're losing control of that.
Yeah, and to your points, Rodney, about the strength of the U.S. market, there was news that came out recently that with the lowest amount of imports in about 40 years, the U.S., and now there was news from China that they're going to start buying our oil again. So maybe some of those trade talks are working, producing some results. Now they're going to more exports there, so that's just going to keep going. Now I want to ask you, you mentioned how oil is the lifeblood of the economy, and we've been watching this over a few years when it spiked really high. Obviously, that just depresses things, but you don't want oil to be too cheap, so people can actually produce it profitably. So where's that sweet spot right about now? Are we sort of there now, or just in terms of generating economic growth?
I think we're actually a little low. At 52, 53 bucks a barrel, we're under. We're probably needed in the mid to upper 60s as a nice range for it, where it produces enough of a return to where we continue the exploration and all of our activities in the oil field in the United States, and it keeps people motivated to do that better. But it doesn't create so much of a drag on the consumption side. We use a lot less than we used to per mile. When you think of our cars getting on average around 25 miles to the gallon, including trucks and everything, whereas back in the 70s we were more like 8 to 10. And so we get a lot more out of the fuel we use, which is great, which means that a price increase like that doesn't hurt like it used to. Plus, as we said, we have those people in the U.S. that are making money off of it. Now, a rise in oil prices actually helps a lot of the U.S.
Yeah, not the way it was before when everyone was screaming at OPEC for.
Well, it was a net tax, right? And that money flew out the door. That was the big thing. When oil prices went up, we sent more U.S. dollars to other people. Yeah. And so there's a huge implication for our trade deficit and for balance of power in the world and all sorts of things. And I couldn't be happier to see that change.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Definitely a game changer. Thanks, Rodney. So let's move on to the next topic, which I think everyone probably has on their mind. Why haven't they talked about stocks yet? Stocks fell about 800 points on Tuesday on trade worries or something. I don't know. But then they bounced right back on the rumor that the Fed is going to pause rate hikes after December. So is that basically it? Are we just all scared about what the Fed's going to do?
Well, we've got several things going on. The trade truce, as I call it, is supposed to last 90 days, where the two sides say, okay, we're going to work really hard on this. Well, are they really going to come to an agreement? I don't know. Nobody knows. But the markets kind of fell away on Tuesday when everybody realized this is really just a temporary pause. And then, of course, the markets were closed on Wednesday for George Bush Sr.'s funeral. And then Wednesday night, we got word that the CFO of Hawaii Industries was arrested in Canada and has asked to be extradited to the United States. We've asked for that, to face charges of breaking the sanctions with Iran. Well, that's a huge deal because that telecom company, Hawaii, is a government-supported entity. And so the Chinese are furious about that. There's a question as to whether or not President Trump and his trade negotiators knew this was coming. I can't imagine they're unhappy about it, though, because it shows strength. And it is just a hard-nosed tactic to say, look, we're going to enforce these sanctions to the point of putting your executives in jail for it, or at least putting them on trial. And so we all expect that to set back the trade talks. But then, of course, the news this morning with the Fed saying, hey, they might pause in rates. And here's something that we need to go back to. The Fed was reported by the Wall Street Journal as potentially pausing and raising rates in 2019. We've been talking about this for 2 months. This is not a new forecast on the planet that they're going to become data dependent after December 18, 19. Right? We've been talking about it. What's different is the Wall Street Journal reported on the front page, and their quote was from interviews and sources. So it looks like we're back to the days 5 years ago when John Hilsenrath of the Wall Street Journal basically had a direct line to Ben Bernanke, and whatever comes out of the Wall Street Journal, you can bet is exactly what the Fed wants us to hear. That was the change in the market this week, where it's basically from the central banker god's lips to the ears of the Wall Street Journal, where the rest of us pedestrians get to hear it.
Well, thank you for being that conduit, Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, exactly, right?
I want to step back to China just for a second. One thing that did come out of it was China agreed to ban fentanyl, which has led to a lot of deaths in the United States. It's literally poison. So if nothing else, at least we'll stop that from coming on our shores. And yeah, we've had our eye on Huawei for a little bit, right? When we're talking about not allowing them to, was it the Pentagon not buying or something? I can't remember exactly, but we had our eye on that company for a bit. And is the lesson here to not, if you're a CEO or CFO, don't leave China or you might be arrested.
How about don't do business with Iran, right?
Yeah, right.
And so Hawaii, we've asked people for the year not to do business with them in 5G components because of spying and other things. And so this is a continuation of the same storyline, but it reached a new level when one of their employees, one of their executives, was basically changing planes in Vancouver, and we asked the Canadian police to pull her out and put her in jail, detain her, and then send her here. That is definitely a new level.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's all I had for this week, Ronnie. Looking ahead to next week, we're going to get reports on inflation, retail sales. Of course, we'll have our eye on the Fed. I've had my eye this week and seeing what's going to go on, especially tomorrow, this yellow vest protest in France. That's caught my eye. There's supposed to be a big demonstration coming out tomorrow, so it could turn violent. Hopefully not. But, I mean, some people are saying we need a sixth republic in France, and we're not going to stop until we get it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's the first instance of something is interesting, and the reaction is also interesting. But that derivative, right? The next step is interesting. Going back to China for a moment, they ban, fentanyl. They ban these opioids. That has a direct effect here in the United States as people can no longer get it through FedEx right off the internet. But it also has an implication for real estate in Vancouver and Australia, because that's where a lot of the Chinese drug money was going, where people were basically putting it into real estate overseas. And so those real estate markets could actually feel a hit from this. And you look at these yellow vests in France, it's people from suburban and rural areas saying, wait a second, your policies are leaving me behind. That is exactly what President Macron ran on when he became president, was let's pull the people from each of the political parties that agree with our more global view of things and the idea that we should become European citizens beyond French citizens, and we should work on climate change and don't worry about the rest. And that's exactly what he did. And now the rest are saying, I'm pretty pissed off because you're not representing me as a Frenchman in all of this. And as I've written elsewhere, do you hear an echo of the United States? I mean, thank goodness our Senate still represents equally among the states. Otherwise, we would have the same thing going on here, where less than 10 city centers in the United States moved policy. And so it is what it is, right? You have to be thankful for the republic you have, else we might have a lot of yellow vests here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Always great stuff, Rodney. Thank you for joining me. Thank you all for watching. If you have any comments, questions, or just general feedback, send those to tv@economyandmarkets.com, and we'll see you next week.